Morning, everyone. David Aragona and Craig Milkowski are taking a look at one of a couple of stakes races carded for Saturday at Belmont at the Big A. Hopefully, we can get race two, the grade two Sands Point, in on the turf. We've not had much luck with the weather in New York City of late. There is rain predicted in the forecast on Saturday, but not as bad as it looked earlier in the week, and it's supposed to come later in the day. So, carding this race as race two, I think it gives a better chance that this race can stay on the turf. And hopefully, it does, Craig, because there's a field of 10 fillies, 3-year-olds entered for the grass. And it's a pretty competitive affair.
It is. When I looked at the preview page in the Timeform USPPs, I mean, all of the spotlight figures are very close to each other. You can see on your morning line, it looks pretty contentious as well. Not paying attention to the main track onlys. Hopefully, we won't need them. But yeah, this seems like a good betting race to me. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, I did peg the morning line favorite as the Charlie Appleby Godolphin runner, the number 7 Eternal Hope, who is coming off a recent graded stakes victory, also at this track, Aqueduct. And it just feels like these Appleby Godolphin runners could never take enough money, Craig. I always make them too high, so figured this one would take some support. But as you said, pretty competitive affair, especially when it comes to the speed figures. A lot of these horses look similar on the way in from a form perspective, so a lot to sift through in this race. Let's take a look at the Timeform US pace projector to get a sense of how this race might be run through the early stages. And it's a little bit murky, Craig. The number 3, Leave No Trace, is shown on the front end, and I suppose she's a horse that could show speed in this race, but she's a bit of a wild card because she's never been on the turf before, and while she has shown some speed in her early races back from her 2-year-old season, her recent form leaves a lot to be desired.
Yeah, I'd say losing by, I think it's well over 100 lengths in her last 2 starts. Definitely a bit of a wild card on the front end. I guess this depends if she's in good form and if she takes the turf. But it's a race that outside of her, there's not a ton of speed in here signed on. It looks like to me.
Yeah, the number 2, Quarrel, has gone gate to wire in the past. The number 9, Stephanie's Charm, showed a lot of speed going 1 mile and 3/8 last time, but I wonder if they'll use different tactics here. So definitely not the clearest pace scenario. Let's go through some of the contenders in this race, Craig, beginning with the horse drawn on the rail, the number 1, Soviet XS, and we'll take a look at her last race in the Winter Memories, also over this same Aqueduct turf course. And she closed pretty well this day because this was a race that was dominated more towards the front end. Horses that had some sort of forward position seemed to excel here, and she has to come wide off the far turn to make this big run to get up into third. She had a little bit of trouble in the early stages that forced her to be as far back as she was, but she showed a strong finish in each of her last 2 starts, and I don't think the slight stretch out to 1 mile and 1/8 is going to bother her at all.
No, I think it may even help. When I was looking through her PPs, wondering if she's a horse who might want more distance than what she's been getting. And she's got speed figures that stack up really nicely against this field.
And even though she's coming out of a listed stakes going into a grade 2, you do want to pay attention to those Timeform US race ratings, which gauge the quality of races that horses are coming out of. And her last race got a 113 race rating, whereas this race has a 110 preliminary race rating. So it's really not the step up in class that the grading system might indicate. The number 2 is Quarrel. We'll take a look at her past performances in Timeform US, and she's one of a number of horses that is coming out of that 11-furlong Jockey Club Oaks Invitational run back in September, Craig. And that was an oddly run race where there was a runoff early leader that we'll get to, and Quarrel was sort of in no man's land, chasing that leader about a dozen lengths behind her, but still a good half dozen lengths in front of the rest of the field. So it was a difficult move to time for Jose Ortiz, and he might have just struck the front too soon, and she might not want to go 1 mile and 3/8 anyway. So cutting back could work for her here, but she still has to run a career best race to beat this field.
She would, and I think she's a strong pace contender, and I think that would be her best effort if she was able. It's just sent to the front, see how far she can take them, like she did in that allowance race 2 back. And her speed figures aren't too far off of the main horses in here, so I don't think she's without a chance.
Yeah, there is a scenario where she finds herself alone in front in this race, and that could help her cause. The number 3 is Leave No Trace, and she's that horse that we were talking about that is shown leading on the Timeform US pace projector. We'll see how they decide to ride her in this race, Craig. I understand why they're trying the turf, because you just want to try something new with a horse where what was working previously is no longer working for her. That's racing a round of ground on the dirt. And she does have some turf pedigree. Outwork is a 13% winning turf sire overall among his progeny. The Dam did seem to do her best running on the turf, but this horse needs a real form reversal from her recent races.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to know what the trainer's thinking. I mean, obviously, it's one of the best trainers in the game here, but it's hard to be optimistic when you look at those last two running lines. It looks like they're just trying to find something that would work, and she wouldn't be for me in this spot.
Take a look at the number 4, Be Your Best, when she competed last time out in the Grade 1 Del Mar Oaks in the summer out in California. And she was beaten by, well, the best 3-year-old fillies turf horse out in California, Anna Zet, who you could see just rushes up the rail to beat her here. But Be Your Best certainly had the tougher trip of those two horses because she was about 3 wide on the first turn, 3 to 4 wide on the second turn, and does make a nice late run to get up into second, though obviously no match for Anna Zet on that day. Her form this year, Craig, has been a little bit up and down. She hasn't gotten back to the winner's circle since early in her 2-year-old season, but she's run competitive speed figures on a number of occasions, and she drew a good post position.
Yeah, I like the post that she's drawn, and normally I'm against the California horses when they ship, but as you noted with that Timeform US race rating, this is not the strongest field that we'll see on the East Coast this year, and I like what I've seen from her. That race she ran in last time has proven pretty strong. The runner-up stepped up and faced older and ran a good second, running second to Didia, and the fourth place finisher has come back to win a nice allowance race. So it's a race that was pretty strong, and it's a rare time where I think she has a real shot in this field, shipping from the west to the east.
Yeah, should note she is cross-entered on Saturday at Keeneland in the Grade 1 Queen Elizabeth II Challenge Cup, but this would appear to be a much more logical spot for her given how tough that race came up. The number 5 is that Jockey Club Oaks Invitational. She closed for second that day, and that just felt like the kind of race, Craig, where you wanted to be the last one to make your move because horses were just falling by the wayside, chasing that fast pace, not getting the distance. And she was one of the final horses to make her move, actually struck the lead in mid-stretch before getting run down by Eternal Hope. I don't think turning back to 9 furlongs is going to bother her at all, and her form has been trending in the right direction.
Yeah, she fits in this field, no doubt about it. It's just a matter of what price she's going to be coming off that good looking effort that I personally think might be a little better than looks, given the way the race set up. But she's fine. Her speed figures fit with the others.
The number 6 is Root Cause, and she's a horse that is coming out of a race at Colonial Downs that a couple of these exit. That's the Virginia Oaks. And Craig, all things considered, I thought she got a great trip that day from Fergal Lynn. She saved ground every step of the way, was held up, but that's kind of the way this horse needs to be ridden. She wants to be held up towards the back and make that one run. And she had to navigate a little bit of traffic, got through, couldn't quite catch 30 Thou Kelvin. And overall, I don't think that was one of the strongest edition of the Virginia Oaks, although we have seen at least one horse come back out of that race and run well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that race was fine. And it's kind of important to note it's not really much weaker than this one based on that race rating. She's pretty lightly raced, just her sixth start going out. So it's Chad Brown's barn. I wouldn't be surprised if she improves some here.
The number 7 is that horse that I pegged as the morning line favorite, Eternal Hope. Let's take a look at that Jockey Club Oaks that we've been talking about. And you could see it in the stretch run that the race just sort of collapses and she's the last one to turn for home on the far outside. And it looks like she's got a lot of work to do, but the horses in front of her are pretty tired at this point in the race. And you could see Nisi Marie slicing down to the inside to briefly take the lead before Eternal Hope runs her down with that big late run on the outside. Craig, I'm not sure how strong this race was overall. It felt like a race where a lot of horses didn't really want the distance. So I don't mind her turning back a little bit, but it feels like she's just going to take money because of connections, and she still has some things to prove to me.
I agree. I was not a fan of that race at all. I know it's only a grade 3, but with the purse, a lot of connections probably shot for a race like that, like it was had a higher grading. So I'm just not high on that one, as we'll see when we get to my selection. She didn't run particularly fast, even though the pace was super fast that day. And I'm not convinced this might not be too short for her. I mean, when you look through her PP, she's never run this short before. And I would imagine there's a reason for that.
Yeah, I think that's a really fair point about the distance. She's a horse that they targeted longer races with in Europe. So 9 furlongs and the speed that it takes to win going this distance in the US, a bit of a question for her. The number 8 is Highland Grace, yet another horse coming out of that Jockey Club Oaks Invitational. She was the 4th place finisher that day. And while she didn't have a bad trip per se, Craig, she was never on the inside. And it was a race where maybe you wanted to save some ground around the 3 turns. She was 2 to 3 wide most of the way. Felt like she tried to make her move in the stretch and was just one of those horses that couldn't quite see out the distance at the end. She was coming off a minor layoff that day. We haven't seen her in 2.5 months. So now she's second off. Maybe she got some fitness from that race.
Yeah, she could have. And as we can see, just like everyone else in this field, her speed figures aren't that far off. These are still 3-year-old fillies who should be improving. So a forward step off of that allowance win two back could get her in the mix.
The number 9, Stephanie's Charm, is the horse that set that suicidal pace last time in the Jockey Club Oaks. Just look at the pace figures in Timeform US. She was absolutely flying along relative to what we would expect for that distance. And no chance that she was going to be able to sustain that pace, Greg, especially given the fact that she was a 52-1 shot in that race. She's a horse that I think is a little better than her recent form might indicate. She didn't have the best trip two back, and obviously last time out was never going to work for her. They're taking the blinkers off, probably going to try out different tactics this time. It just feels like continuing to run these graded stakes races might be a little too tough for her.
Yeah, I mean, all you got to do is take one look down that finish position and beaten Lentz line, and it's pretty clear to me she doesn't really fit in here. Yeah, she's had some tough trips, but speed figure wise and just looking, she wasn't even really competitive in allowance races. She's not for me.
And then the number 10 is Alpha Bella rounding out this field. She achieved her last victory on the dirt, Craig. That was a match race where she won by over 22 lengths over a Chad Brown rival that was basically eased that day. She did go back to the turf last time, though, and raced in that Virginia Oaks where she finished just a neck behind Root Cause. That was a race where both she and the winner, 30 Thou Kelvin, were sort of dominating on the front end, and Root Cause was one of the only horses to make that late move. So I thought she held it decently, given that the pace seemed to be honest. But going back prior to that race, I can't say that I love her turf form earlier in the year. So this feels like it could be a little bit of an ambitious spot.
Yeah, it does. I mean, she doesn't really match up with this field, and I would have a hard time putting her ahead of Root Cause just based on that result last time.
Well, let's throw up our picks for this grade 2 Sands Point, and we've got a pretty similar outlook on this race, Craig. We're both somewhat against that morning line favorite for Godolphin and Appleby, Eternal Hope, and we just switched our top two. You're going for the number 4, Be Your Best.
Yeah, my main strategy here was to go against the Jockey Club's Oaks form because I think the horses out of there are going to be overbet. And like I said, I think that was actually a pretty strong race in California last time for the 3-year-old fillies. And I think Be Your Best is ready to find the winner's circle.
I've got her second. I just put the number 1 Soviet Excess on top, but imagine these horses will be similar prices. And she's just been an overachiever, hasn't gotten much respect recently in the wagering for Todd Pletcher. And I feel like she's turned out to be better than maybe they thought she was. And she's drawn well down towards the inside. So the number 1 Soviet Excess for me, and the number 4 Be Your Best for Craig in the grade 2 Sands Point at Belmont at the Big A on Saturday. Good luck if you're playing the races this weekend.